afternoon, everyone. Great, you can hear me. So my story this afternoon is about what it takes to anticipate in humanitarian response. And I'd like to offer two very preliminary insights from the work that we refer to as anticipatory programs at the START network. So in the humanitarian response landscape, we know that the cumulative number of people having whose needs are rising as a result of what could be predictable crises is quickly catching up with the number of people whose needs are responsive to what are quick, rapid onset disasters. With this changing landscape in humanitarian, with this changing humanitarian landscape, it's absolutely critical that we as humanitarians respond with a different kind of response architecture. That means primarily responding to the risk of crises rather than simply responding to crises as they present themselves and occur. Now, while I understand that this concept might be received wisdom to a good number of us in this room, what surprises me is how slowly and perhaps the pace at which we have actually responded to this critical need, to this important issue. So what I offer today may sound familiar, but please do bear in mind that there's this caveat that I'd like to present. So the START network is a consortium of 42 international and national humanitarian response agencies that have come together primarily to respond to changes in the context and therefore drive an agenda forward of change. And anticipation is one of those key areas. To this end, the START network has piloted in the past year the use of contingency funds. And these contingency funds have been set aside primarily for agencies, member agencies, to anticipate towards crises. And when I say anticipation, what I really mean is very simply responding before the escalation of a crisis. That means responding before the depletion of coping strategies, which might mean reduction in food consumption, or for that matter, a reduction in the asset values, which might be selling of livestock. In 2016, we saw 6 of these anticipatory responses. They range primarily from anticipating flooding through to anticipating heat waves and also drought and famine. So here are my insights. First, it takes a shift in behaviors to anticipate. Of the 6 responses that we had last year, over 4 of them, I say over 4 because it's sort of a range, over 4 of them changed the way that they were actually using information for decision making. So in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Mali, Ethiopia, we had Oxfam, World Vision, Catholic Relief Services, and Save the Children all used data from the meteorological departments from 2015 to map out vulnerabilities across the context in which they were working. So in addition to that, agencies also started to work more in a more coordinated way, but proactively. So for example, World Vision in Sri Lanka, in response to a potential flood, worked with Oxfam and Handicap. And they did this primarily to jointly mitigate this potential flood that they were seeing a few months down the line. They used meteorological data, they used government disaster risk management plans, and decided to come up with a set of activities to mitigate this crisis. Now, interestingly, the crisis didn't happen. However, what I heard from World Vision primarily happened was that what World Vision did get from this process, interestingly, was not only a relationship with the government and an understanding of how the government would lead in response plans, but also enough confidence to shoulder the risk of acting in vain. And what they've now realized is, while that crisis did not materialize, is they have a more robust path to mitigation. So they actually have a sense of what a government-led coordinated response mechanism would look like, but they also have a really good sense of what anticipatory work they need to undertake this year, which includes a mixture of development style, so cash for work programs, in addition to replenishing natural aquifers in Sri Lanka, in the areas in which they worked. This leads me to my second insight. The importance of joining up disaster risk reduction, development, and humanitarian response planning. So in Mali, Catholic Relief Services took a really innovative approach to bring together their urban disaster risk reduction, their development, and their humanitarian response programming to consider mitigating a potential flood with rising levels of water in the Niger River. So what they did was bring these different departments within their organization together. It was the first time they'd actually done this. What they did primarily was to test out what had come from their urban disaster risk reduction program, which was flood-resistant seeds, and then recognize that this was going to be integrated in with traditional response planning. Similarly, in Pakistan, Oxfam decided to bring together humanitarian response along with their preparedness and development activities. And this was to mitigate a potential heat wave that they saw looming in the future. They integrated information dissemination activities along with traditional response mechanisms like setting up camps to deal with heat wave and stroke-related illnesses. And as a result of that, what we saw was the anticipatory program delivered a phenomenal wellness rate of 74% in the sampled communities through, although about 50% of the most vulnerable still suffered loss of income as a result of heat-related illnesses. What I would like to offer, however, is a quote from one of the recipients of these anticipatory programs in Pakistan, and I think it illustrates quite well and also quite coherently across a lot of those who were sampled how this anticipatory response was received by those on the ground. So this is a quote from Nami Lakman from Sindh, and he says, "During an awareness session, I was told to avoid long travel, to sit under a tree, drink lots of water, and use oral rehydration salts to avoid the heat wave. I shared this information with my colleagues and family members. My family and I stuck to those guidelines and stayed safe and healthy during the heat wave." So representative of about over 80% of those who were sampled as part of this response. So to conclude, we all know that anticipation is absolutely critical given the changing landscape of humanitarian crises. And if we are to meet the needs of affected communities as they present, this is absolutely centerpiece. However, the commitment to and the rate of change that I see in how we function across the organization, say with the START network, doesn't really reflect the importance of anticipation. Through our work at the network, these 6 examples that we've seen over the past year, we do know that it's possible to move this agenda forward. And we do know that change can be seen for communities affected by crisis. How we anticipate, how we learn from our programs and our endeavors, and how we facilitate change, now that's the conversation that I would love to see going forward. And I hope my story has helped to spark perhaps a little interest in being able to advance this conversation, and I hope to continue it and move this process along. Thank you very much.
But calling out the Saudis and their backers posed particular risks to our programmes and to our colleagues on the coalface. And there were also funding considerations. And I was involved in many, many difficult conversations as to whether Oxfam could really afford to take on this level of risk.
Field Ready aims to ensure that in every humanitarian response, everyone has access to the supplies they need, when and where they need them. We improve local manufacturing capabilities for response through making, training, and innovating. And we work with partners to identify real needs on the ground, design products to solve those problems, and then work out the manufacturing techniques to make them a reality.